Well, hi everyone and welcome to the channel. Today I'm joined by Vadim, also known as Vince. And Vince was the lucky second winner of the competition, and he has brought along his GTO for us to work on today. Now, the reason he's here and not at his own home, which was part of the competition, is because part of the condition terms was that you had to provide all of the tools to do the job. Now, the entry that Vince has put in is quite a major job, and we had a little discussion and decided that for safety reasons it was perhaps better that he come to this location and we did the job here. So yeah, there's a lot of tools involved. Many of the tools he didn't have to hand, and really this is just the best place to do it. Now, throughout the day, we're going to be stopping and starting the video. It's quite a major request he's had today. And we're going to look at the tools before we start and also have a little bit of a chat about the job. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to Vince and he's going to tell us all about his car and his competition entry. For those of you from anywhere else in the world, the competition is still open to you. If you go onto my forum, all of the rules are still on there, and the competition will remain open to the rest of the world until all the travel restrictions end. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Vadim. While I get all the tools prepped, he's going to tell us all about his lovely car and what his competition entry was. So thank you, Vince, for entering the competition, and congratulations for winning, and I'll speak to you again in a minute.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Vince. I'm based in Essex, and I'm the second lucky winner of Joe's competition. My entry was for cam belt change, and I'm over the moon to see how it's done, and you guys you will have the opportunity to see and learn how this kind of job, which is quite a massive, is really done properly. So a little bit more about my car. It's 91 Mitsubishi GTO, naturally aspirated, auto, so probably the most boring of them all, but I like it. And it's got really nice orangey color, which is not the paint, but it's more like vinyl wrap. The orange and the blue parts, it's all wrap, and underneath it is just black. However, I've never had any opportunities to check what the state of the paint is under the wrap, because that's the way I got the car in the first place. I've owned the car for about a year now, and I don't have any history attached to it. The only thing I know is the car has been sitting for a really long time, probably for about 8 years, and then it was recommissioned and I purchased it. So because of it being sitting for a long time, it was exposed to the elements and things getting rusty, etc. So my plans is to gradually restore it, to replace the parts that's broken, to recondition stuff, and to bring it up to its former glory. So there are no any mods on this car apart from the color. The engine is standard. It's nothing's been replaced in there. So you will have the opportunity to see what the originality of the engine is, and actually for those of you who are interested in purchasing the sort of so-called barn finds, you will see in which usually state you will get the car and what needs to be done on the car when it comes to the engine bay. So that's pretty much it. So thank you, and I'll hand it over to Joe.
Well, now it's tool time, and this is probably one of the biggest jobs you're ever likely to do on your car. The cam belt change needs so many tools, it's unreal. But fortunately, most of them can be bypassed by using other tools and bits and pieces. And as we go through, if I know of an alternative, I'll tell you about it. So just a quick look through. First of all, you're going to need a car jack to remove your wheel. Your standard car jack will do. but I'm also going to use a trolley jack to make the job a bit easier and quicker for myself. You're also going to need some method of supporting the engine. I've got an engine brace here to go across the top of the car. That's purely because it's not my car. If it was my own car, I may well use a cheaper and easier way of doing exactly the same thing. But I'm also going to talk to you about supporting the engine and areas where you must definitely not support the engine from. Then we need some other tools. We're going to need a big breaker bar. You're going to have to undo the big crankshaft pulley, which is done up to 160 Newton meters. You are not going to get that undone with a standard torque wrench. Then we're going to need some torque wrenches. Again, you may well get away without these. I'm using them because it's not my car, so I'm going to need to make sure everything is done up as per the factory manual to make sure nothing goes wrong. That way, if anything does go wrong, it's not my fault. Vince will be looking very nervous at this point. So we've got that in a 1/2 inch, a 3/8 and a 1/4 inch drive. Then with standard wrenches, again, we've got 1/2 inch, 3/8 and a 1/4 inch. I'm sure you'll get away with just using those. I've also got a very narrow bodied socket wrench. This is going to come in handy because we're going to be working down the side of the engine between the engine and firewall, and it's very, very tight in there. On the 3/8 drive, we're going to need some socket pieces, 17, 14, 12 and 10 millimeter. We're also going to need some long body socket pieces, again 17, 14, 12 and 10 millimeter. All of these things are going to aid your access to certain bolts that are really difficult to get to, especially if you don't have access to a car ramp. Some of these things can be made a lot easier if you have a car ramp, but I don't have one, and I'm sure most of you don't have one. In the 1/2 inch drive, again 17, 12, 14 mil, and what was the other one? A 12 mil. And in the 1/4 inch drive, 10 mil short and long body sockets. With spanners, long reach spanner, 12 and 14 millimeter. Gooseneck spanners, 14 and 17 millimeter. Standard ring spanner, 17 millimeter. Grab yourself a whole bunch of wrench extensions, the more the merrier. With ratchet spanners, 12 and 14 millimeter, you can use regular spanners. This will just make the job a bit quicker. Then you're going to need a couple of specialist tools. Now you're going to need to lock off the crankshaft pulley. That's done up to a very high tension. I have these tools specially made. It locks it off beautifully. You can use Mitsubishi's own tool for 10 times the cost, or as in the case of Craig Marple on my forum, he's just made himself his own tool to do the job. You may want to look up what he's done. It looks like a pretty good tool, and if you've got access to welding equipment, you can probably make up your own tool. You also need a special tool for adjusting the tensioner. Now this is a Mitsubishi part. It cost a lot of money. Quite frankly, I thought it was quite poor quality product. So I've seen other people do it with a pair of circlip pliers, and that's what we're going to try today. You also need the locking pin for your tensioner, assuming you're going to reuse the old tensioner. When we get to the job, I'm going to talk about reusing the old tensioner. I don't think you should, but you never know, you may need to. You're going to need a flathead screwdriver with a small tip, 4 or 5 millimeters, no more. You're going to need some cable ties. You're going to need a puller to get off that bottom pulley. A small torch with a telescope on it may well come in handy. A collection of bulldog clips, going to make the job much easier for you. A large ratchet strap to go around the bonnet to hold on to some of the parts to put them out the way. Some bungee straps, some old rags, something to protect your bodywork, These are jacking plates that I'm presently getting made, and I'll show you those as we go along. And finally, probably most importantly, you're going to need the first aid kit. This is a really difficult job for space, and almost guaranteed you're going to be catching your knuckles and fingers on some sharp pieces and cutting yourself. So have some plasters to hand to sort out your cuts and grazes. So that's a look at the tools. Let's look at how the job goes from here. Now for this video, Vince has asked that we change the cam belt on the car. For those of you who don't know what one is, this is a cam belt. We don't need to go into construction because none of us are intending on making it, but it's a very, very strong material, or multiple materials that make up the cam belt. You need to change it periodically, and there's lots of different reasons for that. Maybe you've got oil on it, very, very bad, it starts to degrade the material and you'll need to replace it. It could be because something else has failed in the system and you need to take the belt off and replace it, or put the old one back on. Or it could be that the belt has slipped for some reason, and there's different reasons why it might slip, and you need to correct that problem. Now this belt lives behind these covers here, and it goes all the way down to the bottom of the engine. And as you can see, we've got very limited space in here to do the job. Now I've seen a number of videos online, most of them show almost a magic show, smoke and mirrors, and you don't actually get to see what they're doing. Others remove the engine first, which is by far the easiest way of doing the job, but not all of us want to remove the engine. In fact, I know I wouldn't want to remove the engine in order to do a cam belt because it's so much work. Now, just for the video, I've got a spare engine over here, so we're going to take a look at the front of the engine just so you can see how it all works. So at the bottom here, this bolt goes into the crankshaft, which goes the full width of the engine and allows the pistons to move up and down. The crankshaft has this belt attached to it, and it goes up the top, around the two cams at the top, and then back down again. In the middle is a couple of pulleys and a tensioner. But in order to get to that belt, we've got to remove a whole bunch of other stuff, and that's what makes the job so much bigger and harder. We also have our air conditioning pump, we have our alternator, we have a idler pulley, we've got a tensioner pulley just for this one belt. Then the second belt goes to another tensioner and to your steering pump. So all of this has got to come off. Now at the bottom here behind this pulley is another one which your belt runs on in those teeth. And also behind here you have your water pump, and one of the common things to happen is the water pump starts leaking, and then that water drips down onto this pulley here. You get rust build up, and that allows the belt to slip, and that gives you problems because this engine is known as an interference engine. That means that it's possible for the piston to be going up and the valve to come down at the wrong time, hit the piston and do a lot of damage. For that reason, it's really, really important that the cam belt is set up absolutely precisely to avoid damage to the engine and to maintain overall performance of the engine. So that's a quick look at the engine out of the car, a look at where all the parts are that we're going to be removing in order to get to the cam belt. Now let's move on with the job itself. For the first part of this job, we're going to have to remove the left-hand wheel in order to gain access to the engine. Now, in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Vince for him to take his wheel off. But just before we do that, I wanted to talk about car jacking in general. Now, there are set jacking points on this car which are covered in the manual. On each side, we are jacking from the seals, and there are specifically marked out jacking points on those seals. Assuming you don't have any problems with your car, the seals are more than strong enough to jack using the regular car jack, and if that's all you've got to hand, you're welcome to use that and it will do the job fine. You're just going to need to jack on the left hand side just to get the wheel off. We're also going to be needing to circumstances must you ever jack from the oil pan, and there's a good reason for that. The oil pan at the bottom of your engine is your oil pickup tube, and that sits very low down in there. If you dent the metal up, you're going to cover your oil pickup tube, and that means less oil is going to go round your engine and cause damage. So whatever you do, do not jack on the pan. The other proper jacking place is underneath the front of your car. Now, whether you've got a turbo or non-turbo model, you're going to have this hole here for jacking. There should be a cover over the top of it, but 99.9% of the garages that you take your car to remove that cover and they can't be bothered to put it back on. Assuming you have the cover, remove the cover first, and then you can jack straight onto. It doesn't particularly cause a problem for your car. Your car is now, it's all dented. The best thing to do is put there first, which will then straighten it out a bit. Or hopefully these jacking plates made up. They're made from 10mm steel with 12mm heavy duty rubber on them. I've also had a groove cut in for the seals to spread the load over a much bigger area of the seal. And you can drop that on there, jack onto that plate, and there's not going to be any damage at all, no risk of you touching your plastic either. So at this point, I'm going to jack the car for us and remove the wheel ready to start the job. Okay, that looks about it. Yep.
Wow, that's so much easier with the big jack. I've got,
Yeah.
I've got a small
You
one.
can move the table out the way if you like.
That's alright.
Oh, sorry.
With the big handle.
So Vince has removed the wheel, and now he needs to remove this piece of plastic and this piece of plastic, and they're going to be done in that order. This one first and then this one. In order to remove this piece, we have some of these screw clips, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we've got, I believe, 5 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4, and one up the top here. Now Vince is a real hands-on sort of guy, and he wants to do as much of this job as possible himself, so I'm now going to hand over to him to do the job for us.
So now that I have mic on, I can speak. You held down, you've probably seen it on one of Joe's previous videos. For that you need a flat screwdriver and a spanner which is 8mm, something like that. No, 10mm. So undo the plastic clips and a few bolts. What can go wrong, right? Let's get on with it.
Second piece of plastic is held in by 3 bolts. You have one here, one up under here, and one up under here. 12mm, an extension of some sort will help you to get into there. Now, we've already noticed that 2 of these bolts are missing, so there's just one left sitting here. I'm going to leave Vince again to do that for himself. Now at this point I'm changing over to a different car for a minute. In a previous video I did for a competition winner, a couple of people complained because I didn't do the job on a twin turbo model. Well, I can't do it on every single car. There has to be a line somewhere, and the line was drawn by the competition winner. I didn't choose which car I have, it just so happened to be a non-turbo. But for this particular job, I can do it on both cars because both engines, as far as the cam belt goes, are identical to work on, or near on identical. The only difference is the initial preparation in order to do the job. So I've come onto the twin turbo just for a minute to show you the only differences where you're going to have to do something a little bit extra. So for this part of the job, you're going to need a 12mm wrench, and you're going to need a 10mm quarter-inch wrench. So to start off with, we've got this AC line here. It's a little bit in the way of other stuff that we need to get to. To remove that, start off with your 12mm and undo this bolt here. Remove the bolt completely. Then here, you've got a 12mm nut. Remove that nut completely. And then we follow it round over to the back here. We've got two 10mm nuts here. Just remove both of them. Now luckily Mitsubishi was good enough to put in some flexible sections of hose. So at this point we can lift this AC line out of the way, and I've already put the ratchet strap around the bonnet. This will allow us now to tie this up out of the way. I just need to get a bungee strap, just give me a second. Just get your bungee strap around there. How you hook it up is entirely up to you. This is just the easy way I find for myself. Okay, next thing is we need to remove this control box here. Again, your 10mm wrench with an extension on, just 4 nuts. Two down the back here. And now this box will lift out. Now you've got a plug on here, just down the side here. Press in the tag, undo the plug. We can now hook this one up out the way as well. Now we need to get this hose out the way, but we need to take out pretty much the whole section, and it goes right over the back here. So first of all, we'll loosen off this Jubilee clip. Then onto your 12mm wrench. You've got one nut here, or one bolt here. And then you've got another one right down the back here. I think the cameraman might be better around the other side. It's this one just here. I think I'm going to need a longer bar for this one. this point we can pull the hose off and remove this piece of metalwork. We'll try again. Now this section of hose, just a simple 10mm down here with a spanner, and you don't actually have to remove it. I don't think. We'll probably just be able to twist it out the way or even hold it out the way. But it will certainly be a bit easier as far as space goes if you at least very tight on space in there. I was hoping a couple of turns would get that moving. Damn. So we'll just turn that out the way. Now with your 10mm, loosen off this one. And this one over here. With your 12mm, remove this bolt. And now this hose can be removed. Now from this point on, everything is the same for the turbo and non-turbo models. All you needed to do was make yourself that bit of space there by removing a couple of hoses. So now we'll go back to Vince and we'll carry on with his car. Okay, so now Vince is going to remove the airline exactly as we did on the turbo model and strap it up to the ratchet strap around the bonnet. Same as on the turbo model, we'll now remove the cruise control box and strap it up out the way. for the next part of the process, we need to remove the auxiliary belt for the air conditioning pump and the alternator. It's quite a simple process. First of all, 14mm wrench or spanner. You just need to loosen the belt here in the middle. Then go on to a 12mm spanner, and we've got a bolt up the top here. All you need to do, get your spanner on there and loosen it off. Now as you loosen it, you're going to see this pulley come down, and that will release the tension on the belt, allowing us to remove it. Next part of the job, we need to remove these two cam belt covers. In order to get the back one off on the naturally aspirated engine, we're going to have to remove these two plugs. If you're lucky, they'll just pull straight off, although be a bit tight. That's one. Never pull on the cables. That's two. If ever you find these really tight and you can't get them off, just get yourself a little pick tool, just pop that little metal clip out first, and then they'll come off easily. Now we've got 5 10mm bolts. One, two, now for some of you, there's going to be a cable coming through here with a clip on there. It's all exactly the same process. Just be aware that yours might be slightly different because the newer engines have the crank sensor and cam sensors mounted on this side of the engine rather than on the other side. Now we've got one final bolt and a cable retainer on this side. Nice long extension to get down in there. Okay, now to lift these covers out, this back one particularly can be a bit tight. You've got very little space in there. Depending on how everything's located and how well your engine's been mounted, it will either come out very easily or you'll have to wiggle and jiggle to get it out. And this is a wiggle and jiggle. And it's going to be a real nuisance one. Gasket out of there that we'll put back in after, and then the front cover is usually a much easier one. See, this belt is unbelievably slack. I'm quite shocked that that's still on the car actually. Wow. Now you'll see there will be some slack depending on where the engine's stopped, but should never see that volume of slack. Now you'll see this has been done previously before, and someone's marked where the timing marks are. That one was in the wrong place. Your timing marks, if you look around the edge of your wheel here, you will find a tiny little drilled mark in the cam. There should be one on each cam, front and back. And now what we're going to do is turn the engine via the crankshaft to line up all of the timing marks so we've got a good starting point. For that you need your 1/2 inch wrench, possibly a breaker bar depending on how tight your engine is, and a couple of extension bars. At this point we're going to get our 1/2 inch drive extension bar into this hole in the middle here, and then we're going to turn the engine clockwise, and you're going to keep on turning the engine until you see those timing marks at the top line up, and they need to line up with these arrows at the back here. We've got one there, one in there. It's easier to film from this side, I think. And then you've got the same place on the back ones, which are much harder to film. So we'll keep turning the engine nice and slow until all of the marks come into position. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Luckily everything is lined up, so it doesn't look like anything's slipped. And we're going to leave it at that position for now. For the next part of the process, we're going to need to remove the alternator and the alternator bracket. Now we don't actually need to take these completely out of the car, and trying to get it completely out of the car is a whole lot more work. So all we're going to do is, by lifting up this arm and disconnecting the bracket mounting, we can just move it out of the way to gain access to where we need to get to. For this you're going to need 12 and 14mm spanners and sockets, depending on how you choose to get to it and how tight the bolts are. That one's not too bad. That's surprisingly loose. I'll get the top one out first. Uh, 12mm spanner. This nut here, we'll just loosen this off. By loosening this, it will allow us to swivel the bracket without removing the alternator. Two 12mm bolts here. Now we can lift it enough to get this bolt out. And now with a little bit of Chinese jigsaw, and that's set on there hard. Oh, I missed a bolt. I do apologise. There's one more just down the back here, hidden out of the way. Not easy to work with grease on your hands. In fact, it's impossible because everything is slipping. That for me, Vadim. If I hold this, can you get in there?
Yep.
Okay, now we can swivel this bracket up out of the way. Next part of the process, we're going to remove this engine mount that is completely in the way and restricting our space. Because this isn't my car, I'm not going to risk jacking from underneath to support the engine. We're going to put in a proper engine brace. So Vince is going to bring that round for us.
You want to put this
Through this gap here. And just find a suitable place. We sort of need to be in line here. Bring down that AC line a little bit. Then at the back of the engine here, you've got an engine mounting point, so you can slip that through there. Hold on the one side here. Here we'll get the engine mount. If you just lift it.
I'll hold it.
I need you to actually get the brace on the other side just to bring your side over with mine. That's it, through there. That's it. Push on there. You got it?
Yeah, got it.
Now we're not trying to lift the engine, it is purely to take the strain. So when we remove this engine mount, the engine doesn't tilt on one side. So from here on, we've got 2 nuts on this side, 1 on the other side, and these 3 here to remove. Start with your 14mm. And remove these 2 nuts. And then on the other side, you've got a 17mm. And that's also accompanied by a split washer. Now we've got the 3 17mm here, all with split washers. Now if the tension is suitably taken up, we should now be able to lift off this engine mount. There we go. Now just by releasing it, we've now released the pressure on this bolt, so we should be able to press that through and continue taking the mount off. Make a note, these rubbers have arrows pointing to the outside of the car. If you happen to drop these, make sure you put them on the same way round. And to avoid losing all your washers and nuts, you just put them back into place. It just helps to remember where everything goes and make sure you don't lose them. For the next part of the process, I've come over to an engine that's outside of the car. And the reason for that is there is absolutely no space to film the next part of the process. What we need to do now is remove the power steering belt and pulley. To do that, you're going to need two 14mm spanners probably, ideally with a really nice long neck, because your arms are going to be struggling to get into the gap. So if you loosen this bolt and this bolt with your long neck, if you want to, you may then, depending on how loose your bolts are, you may be able to get your fingers down there to gently turn it. If not, you can go over to a ratchet spanner and undo it with a ratchet spanner. You need to take this pulley off completely, this tensioner. So take the top one out completely, or the bottom one, it makes no difference, but it just gives you a bit more space. Then get the bottom one out. Take the pulley off and take the belt off. So that's the next part of your process, and we're going to do that on the car that's on the engine that's in the car. Now I've left this job to Vince because it's particularly difficult and tight, and I'm pretty sure someone's going to get some cut fingers, so I thought I'd leave it for him to do. He's decided the best way to get in there is to go from underneath. Some people like to go under, some like to go over. Do you want the ratchet spanner, Vince? It'll make it a lot quicker and easier.
Yeah, let's go try it with this spanner. That was a little uncomfortable.
There's a foam mat here for you.
No, I'm sorry. As long as I don't have that thing.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Just watch it doesn't drop onto your face when you get that second bolt out. It's quite heavy.
In the eye.
With the pulley out the way, you can now get the belt off.
Come on.
Yeah, that's seen better days. Time for a new one. For the next part of the process, we're going to remove the engine mount brackets. And to remove that, we need to remove this pulley completely because the bolts are behind the pulley. To get to that, you can see we've got virtually no space to get any sort of tools in there. So what we're going to do is disconnect these oil lines from the body of the car that allows us just enough movement to get a ratchet in there, a wrench in there. So we'll start off with one bolt just here. And then if you put on an extension bar, undo this one here. Now this isn't going to give us a whole lot of room, but as you can see, this line can now be moved around quite readily, and it should give us just enough space to get a wrench in there. Ideally, if you've got one of these very narrow ones. Do this from underneath. And once you've got it part way, you can take your wrench off and then use your fingers to remove it the rest of the way. Oh, please tell me, yes, just enough. There we go. Yeah, that's seen better days as well. Now we have access to this bracket, and I'm going to take you over to the other engine now to show you all the bolts that need to be undone. I've chosen to show you on an engine that's off the car purely because some of these bolts can't be seen while it's in the car. So we have 1, 2, 3, and then round the side here 2 more bolts. Now, of course, on the engine that's out of the car, the the engine that's in the car, the alternator's out of the way, so it'll give you that bit more space. A minute or two here and there, little bits.
Oh, well. Ready? Yeah.
I just thought I had a cup of tea about an hour ago, didn't I? So, which way round? I did this recently and it was a real, like, oh, so that's how it goes. It's so simple when you know how.
I'd say you're on the right path. Move it to where the engine mount is, and then bring the bottom out once you're where the mount is. If you just take out this bolt.
Yeah, the bolt doesn't seem to be in the way.
Well, it was just stopping you from coming round anymore.
Oops. Oh, come on, it's really simple when you get it just right. There, I knew there was a way. Once again, we're switching to the engine that's out of the car, just again so I can show you what we're going to be doing next. So the next part of the job is to remove the crankshaft pulley. We have to do this in order to get this cover off. So the crankshaft pulley, we're going to need two tools. One is a 1/2 inch wrench and a pulley locking tool. We do not want the pulley to turn while we're trying to undo it. But this thing's done up at 160, I think it's 160 Newton meters. That's an awful lot of strain. So we need a special tool to hold that while we undo it. Let's go over to the car and have a go. You're going to notice on the front of the pulley, we've got these two holes here. These are for your locking tool. So on your locking tool, you have these two pins. You're going to locate those into the holes, hopefully like so, and lock the other end against the bodywork. Now you put your 1/2 inch drive in through the middle, and I'm going to give this job to Vince because he looks like a big strong guy, to let him undo it.
Clockwise, anti-clockwise?
Anti-clockwise, anti-clockwise. That's pretty strong, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
It will go eventually unless some muppet has used a permanent glue on there, which I have seen before and I had to drill them out. You're going the right way, carry on. I do hope some muppet hasn't used a permanent thread lock.
Just be careful as the tool to hold it in is starting to shift. It's shifting, you want to go put it back on.
Okay, so just so you know, that took two of us, every ounce of strength we've got to loosen that off.
So essentially, that job is not one man.
It's not a one-man job,
No, no.
and you need to make sure you've got some really good quality tools. One bolt out. With the bolt removed, this pulley should now come off completely. But one thing to note before you try pulling it, the pulley is made up of a steel ring, then a rubber ring, then a steel ring, then a rubber ring, then the steel inner. Quite often now, because the age of these cars, the rubber is starting to come away from the steel, and if you try pulling this, it will just rip it clean apart and then you'll need a new pulley. If it's already starting to delaminate, you need a new pulley anyway. Here's a brand new one, and you can see steel, rubber, steel, rubber, steel. We're going to have a go at pulling this off first of all. Quite often, if you're lucky, you can literally just get one hand on each side and wiggle, and it will sometimes come apart. But I'm looking in through the gap here, and there is an awful lot of rust. So I'm now going to have to go and get a puller to get that off. So this pulley was completely fused on, and we already know the reason. The water pump on this car is leaking water, and it's caused a substantial amount of rust between the pulley and the crankshaft. I tried putting a pulley puller on there, and it just didn't want to know even with a puller. In the end, the way we got around it was tapping on the side of the pulley, but it's very specific where you have to tap. Can I have the camera down here a second? As I said, the pulley is made up of steel, rubber, steel, rubber. This center band of steel is directly connected to the steel behind that bolts into the crankshaft. But this one here is separate. So when you tap, you must tap on the center ring and don't hit it hard. Just a gentle tap, and that straight away broke the frozen on pulley. And then all you need to do is just wiggle it side to side until it comes off. Now this pulley here, you can see, is heavily rusted in there, and as a result it's caused the belt to be stripped of all its rubber. It's just more or less sandpaper that it's slipping on. So we're going to give this a really good clean before we put it back on. The rubber itself has not degraded in any way or broken away, so there's no reason at all why we can't reuse this pulley. We're now down to the final part that needs to be removed before we can get the cam belt off. That final part being this piece of plastic in here. Now the reason I've brought you over here is first of all to show you where all the bolts are. So we've got one up the top here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But there's another one that most people don't find, and they end up breaking the plastic trying to get it off. That's because it's tucked right round the back here, in here. And not only can we film this on the car because it's too far down the back, but also it's very difficult to get to. So I've already said to Vince that we're going to give that job to him. I've got enough cuts on my knuckles and elbow today, so it's his turn. Also, for some of you with the newer versions of engine, you've got this electrical connector here. One wire goes to your camshaft sensor, one wire goes down to your crankshaft sensor. You don't need to remove the sensors, but you are going to need to remove this bolt here to allow the cables to come away from the plastic. And then you've also either got to cut the cable tie, as a previous person has done, or if you can get your hand between the plastic and the bodywork once the cover's off, you can just pinch the side of the clip and take it out without cutting the cable tie. So let's go and get the piece of plastic off. Now try out the bottom. And there we go.
Yeah, there's one bolt in there still. Oh.
Okay, so cover off. We now have full access to the cam belt. At this point, I'm now going to realign the timing marks, because in moving the bottom pulley, it's moved the timing marks slightly off. Then we're going to lock the cams so that they don't slip when we try putting the belt back on and when we're taking the old belt off. And then we're going to go through the process of replacing all of the pulleys, the belt and the tensioner, so everything's correct. So at this point, I'm going to pause the video, get the tools ready for the next section. For the final part of the strip down, we're just going to realign all the pulleys again and then lock them off so they don't move when we're trying to reassemble it. The front two cams are going to be preloaded. The springs inside the cams are going to be pushing hard, trying to make them move, whereas the front ones, back ones are in a neutral position and won't move anyway. So I'm going to go straight back on the crankshaft end, and I'm just going to turn this so all the timing marks are back in alignment. I've only moved one tooth. There we go, so they're back in position. Now there's a number of ways you can lock these off. You can buy a camshaft locking tool. That's one option. But these are DIY videos, and many of you are not going to want to spend money on tools that you may only ever use once during the life of the car. Option 2 is one that I use quite a lot. Just get yourself some bolts that are the right size thread for these holes here. I believe they're 8mm. You'll see that one of them is right in front of that cam arm there. And all you need to do, is a fraction out. just screw that bolt in there. That stops it moving one way. Then with the other bolts you can find a selection of socket pieces and just put them in there with a bolt, and then it stops it moving the other way. And just repeat the process for these two here as well. Just find the right socket piece to take up that gap and lock it off. That's option one, and it won't cost you a penny other than a couple of bolts. The other option is the one that Mitsubishi show in the manual, which is surprisingly crude and yet should work, although I've never used it myself. So today, just for an experiment, I'm going to use the Mitsubishi option. For that, you're going to need two 17mm spanners, one with a gooseneck, one with a regular ring spanner. You're going to put a spanner on there and one on there. So get this round the right way, and I believe Domino's has just turned up with our food, so we're going to have to pause a second. Okay, sorry about that. So we get our two spanners on here. Then you need a cable tie. You're going to lock the spanners in every way possible so they can either open or close in any way at all. Okay, I think I prefer my method, but we've got to try all ways. Done there to there, there to there. Yeah, maybe that will work. We'll see. So now we can take out the tensioner and remove it. The tensioner's this bottom here. Now if you're planning on reusing your tensioner, you're going to need the tensioner retaining pin. That goes in through the little hole on the side here. Should slide all the way through. If it doesn't, you can put some tension on your belt to take up the space. Right, that's it. So the pin goes all the way through. Once the pin's through, the tensioner will be held in position and won't spring out when you remove the belt. Now you can get your spanner or wrench and undo the tensioner bolts. I fear some more blood is coming here. One. Two. That's the tensioner out. With the tensioner removed, the belt is now completely slack and easy to remove from the rest of the car. For goodness sake, don't allow the spanners to come undone. One belt out. Now from this point now you can see we're all fully ready to move on with the refurbishing of all these items and putting it back together. But for us, Domino's has just arrived, so it's a good time for lunch.